Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
MashaAllah. We are once again here with our podcast. This time we have an international guest, that Moulana Shaykh Sulaimaan Ravat Sahab, MashaAllah, who is not new to the media world. MashaAllah, he has been the center manager of Radio Islam International in South Africa for how many years, Moulana?
Alhamdulillah, almost 20 years with Radio Islam.
Subhanallah, subhanallah. So we need to learn from you, MashaAllah. So, Alhamdulillah, Moulana is here in our area for a short visit, MashaAllah, and Moulana has been gracing us regularly. Allah accept his coming. And so we just wanted to do a little podcast with yourself, MashaAllah. One thing, Moulana, we see is that South Africa, MashaAllah, we have a lot to learn from in terms of radio and MashaAllah. Now, MashaAllah, we've got the Islamic curriculum and now this Maktab system, Alimi board. But I think the pioneers of all of this was South Africa. In the 90s, I remember the ulama from Jamiyat used to come down and used to train our ulama. So, number one, we need to show our appreciation to the ulama of South Africa like yourself for being our role models in these kind of things. So, Alhamdulillah, you are here for our Seerah program, I believe, MashaAllah, Seerah conference.
Ji, inshallah. Tomorrow, Habib al-Quran are hosting the annual Seerah conference. I was honored last year with an invite, and this year again. It's always good to be in Batli, mashallah.
MashaAllah, one thing I really like about your talks is they are very organized and structured, which I personally really enjoy, MashaAllah. May Allah accept.
Ameen.
So, is there a particular way you prepare your talks, or like any tips you can give us?
Look, I think to be a good speaker, in my opinion, you've got to be a good listener.
MashaAllah.
So off the podium and when I'm not behind the microphone, I don't speak much. And people sometimes, they find it a bit odd. They when they meet you in person, they expect to hear you talk as much as you talk when you're on the mimbar or when you're behind the microphone or behind the camera. And that's not my personality. I'm not an introvert. If the subject matter interests me and I have an opinion on something, I can talk quite a bit. But when it comes to general social chit-chat and banter, I will talk a bit, but I'm not too much. I'm not an extrovert. So it's only later on we learn that there is other categories besides extrovert and introvert, and I probably fit in there. But every personality type has its advantages, and I suppose in some ways certain challenges as well. So the one good thing about being an ambivert is that you speak less, so you get to listen more. And when you listen more, I think your own understanding of how people think broadens and deepens. And that results then in you being able to choose certain topics which resonate and which people can identify with. But choosing a topic is one thing, right? It's how you then deal with the topic. So the normal example that I give when I'm speaking to people who are into public speaking, or especially young ulama, I say to them, if you take a simple topic like that of parents, right? So you take the topic of parents, you're not going to find a new ayah. You're not going to find a new hadith, right? What is the core message? It's about respecting the parents, the rights of the parents, the virtues of the parents. That's not changing. Right? That's the same. So what's going to differentiate your talk from any other talk? If you quote the ayat, you quote the ahadith, you mention the fundamental point, respect your parents, the benefits of it, the harms of not respecting your parents, the consequences, etc. Everybody will say good talk. But how do you take a good talk and make it into a great talk? Right? Is that you've got to, for example, understand what's happening in society and then be able to pitch and give the right examples and the right angles. So just in passing, normally when we talk about parents, what's the attitude of a congregation? Say on a Friday, if you talk about parents, all the middle-aged and elder people will look at the youngsters, the youth, and say, pay attention. You heard what Moulana said? But there are many middle-aged people there whose parents are still alive.
Definitely.
But for some reason, they think it doesn't relate to them. There are many people perhaps who are touching 60 and their parents are still alive in the 80s. And they think it doesn't relate to them. It only relates to the youth, because the youth are generally the ones that are rebellious and, challenging the authority of their parents and the decisions of their parents. It obviously relates to them, but relates to others as well. So when you read, you've got to read a lot, broad-based reading, beyond just the core issues that you deal with. You start understanding society. In public speaking, they tell you before you promote the thesis, you've got to deconstruct the antithesis. So before you promote something, you've got to say, well, this is the opposite of it, and why? This is why the opposite can't be what we want it to be, and therefore it's got to be this. So yeah, I mean, look, there are different categories of speakers, man. I don't want to get too technical, but and each one has its place. You get speakers who are motivational speakers, and these are just my own definitions, right? But just to create an understanding. So motivational speakers don't go too deep. They're not very academic. They're not very nuanced. They just reiterate the core basic messages to motivate you, and they have a place. Yeah, then you've got emotional speakers. Emotional speakers are the ones who will make you cry. You know, they touch on your chords of emotion, and they have a place. They, you know, to soften the heart. Then you've got inspirational speakers. Inspirational speakers are the ones who can inspire you to change. You know. And they have the ability to lift a person's thinking and to switch a person's thinking. Then you've got educational speakers, and the educational speakers are the ones who are a little bit more structured. So taking that same example of parents, a motivational speaker will just make one or two basic points that under your mother's feet is Jannah. Motivates you to look after your mother. An inspirational speaker is the one who will go a bit deeper and make you change your attitude. You know, if it was from a negative one to a positive one. An emotional speaker will tell you one story about a child who disobeyed the mother, but the mother still looked after the child, and everybody will start crying. Right? Even those whose mothers have passed away will think of their mothers and start crying. That's an emotional speaker. An educational speaker will take the whole concept of respecting parents and structure it. That what do we believe in? Why is it that we believe in something, but there's a gap between our belief and our actions? Which segments of society don't think that this topic relates to them? So it's almost like building a house. I feel when you're giving a talk. So when I sit down to prepare a talk, I keep a blank piece of paper in front of me. It's a technique that a teacher in my formative years in school taught me. And I draw a circle in the middle of the page and I'll write parents. And then I'll draw in lines out of that circle. What are the angles that I want to cover? So I do this, I do that, I do that, I do that. At the moment, I'm busy preparing for a presentation that I have to do in a couple of weeks' time at the Ulama conference in Zambia. So my topic is the strategies of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Right? So I'm reading 2 books on the strategies of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and I've got one chapter in my book, the last chapter actually in my book, which talks about guidelines to success, is actually the strategies of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. It's based on an article that I had read some years ago. So as I'm reading these books, I'm jotting down these points and I'm jotting them down. And then after I jot down all the points in the book, I sit with the book and say, right, whatever I jotted down, I narrow it down onto a piece of paper into different categories. Now I look at those categories and I further narrow it and I say, right, now what's going to be my introduction? And I've decided, okay, my introduction to this talk is going to be why this topic? Because that's the first thing that's going to come to the mind of the person. Why are you talking the strategies of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? That's not a topic that's often spoken about. Then after that, what is strategy? Definition. Okay, so then we go into that. Now, how do I categorize it? Because I can take 5 different stories in the 20 minutes that I've been allocated to do the presentation and just mention those 5 stories. But I would prefer a more structured approach. So the first category is I want to talk about the strategies of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that relate to his personality. Then the second would be his interpersonal strategies, how he dealt with others. And the third would be his administrative, diplomatic and military strategies. And that pretty much would take out the time, and then I got to just work out on a conclusion. So I go through these phases, put things on paper, then narrow it down further, narrow it down further, narrow it down further until you've got the core of it. And then once you've got the core of it, you do it the first time and then you do it second time, and as you go, you just adjust it a little bit. So that's a long answer to your question.
SubhanAllah. I think he comes with the name also, Sulaimaan. MashaAllah, like I've seen quite a lot of Sulaimaan who mashallah speaks very well, mashallah. Allah fafahamnaha Sulaimaan. So mashallah, just 2 questions. Mashallah, you've recently released a book. So if you can just tell us a little bit about your book, mashallah.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So, you know, because you mentioned that people tend to appreciate structure, from the early days, many people used to come to me and say, you know, Shaykh, you must put your lectures in a book form. And I would just smile and say, no, inshallah, inshallah. But I had a lot of reservation and reluctance in my heart because I don't write my talks out in full. Right? Like I said, I got that particular thing. So I write it in point form.
Right.
And it's in my handwriting. And I'm more intelligent than a doctor, so my handwriting is untidier than that of a doctor on a lighter side. So I thought to myself, you know, I don't have the time. to sit and take all these talks and to write it out, because when you write something out, you got to check your
Yes.
grammar and this. When you're speaking, it's more natural, it's flowing, right?
True.
And also the style of speaking is for the ear.
Yeah.
And then the style of writing is for the eye. It's two different styles. So you've got to adapt it. So I don't have the time. And I thought, okay, I don't have the time, but I can't even ask somebody to help me because they can't make, sense of my writing. Both my brothers are alims. So I've got a whole file of all my talks. And then I had it all scanned and now I got it on the cloud. So I put it for them in a flash drive and I said, yeah. And they're like, every time they're phoning me, I'm looking at this talk of you. What's written here? I can't make out, what was written here. So anyway, I thought, how's this going to happen? Even if I give this whole file to someone, it's not going to happen. Then a colleague of mine, Mufti Yusuf Musaji, he did a series on the radio a couple of years ago in Ramadan on happiness. And I had given a talk, which was very well received on happiness prior to that. And then he took that series and he adapted it and he put it in book form and he launched his book. And then he came to me and said, look, man, we've got to work on your book. So I think the problem is I've got all the content, but I understand what's happening and nobody else is going to understand. So I don't see how this is going to become possible. Then the thought came that, okay, many or most of my talks, the audio recordings were available. So maybe there's somebody who we can give the audio recordings, they will transcript it. Once it's transcripted, then somebody else can sit with it and adapt it so it's easier for the eye than on the ear. We started the process, but to transcribe is very time consuming because if you take a 20-minute bayan, to listen to it and to write down would take you 3-4 hours. And there was quite a bit. So I had about 40 recordings of certain bayans, which we gave to a young alim. He started, it took a lot of time. He completed about 20 odd, I think. And then we said, look, we can't put all 40 into a book because it's going to become too large. We narrowed it down to 15. Then we gave it to somebody to edit. Then they sent it back. I looked at it. I felt it needed more work. We gave it to somebody else. They edited. Then I did the final edit. And then we had to work on certain things to adjust it. Certain things we had to take out because it was very specific to the audience that I was speaking to at that particular time, or very relevant. Certain jokes people in UK won't understand because it's got a South African context. Or certain things were mentioned in the talk which are relevant to that time period. Something was happening there. So we had to do all of those adjusting, and it went to and fro. And then, subhanallah, in December last year, the publisher, who's an author herself, sent me a message, and I thought that I would take my time with this and launch it at some point. We're just going through the processes slowly. There was no urgency, and she said, "Look, Moulana, I've written books and I've edited books, and as I'm editing your book, I'm finding it very uplifting, very inspirational. I think you need to fast track this process, and you need to get this book onto the shelves before Ramadan." And I said, "But it's 3 months for Ramadan. There's a lot of work to do, and I've got a very, very busy schedule. Where am I going to get it? Because the final editing I had to do myself. It's going out in your name. You've got to be confident that what is in there you can stand by." I said, "All right. If she's got the enthusiasm, let's make himmat." So up and down, the transcripts were going onto my phone while I was traveling, checking, sending voice notes back, with feedback, take this out, take that out. Was one young alim, Kari Hamad, who was part of the Radio Islam team. He said, okay, he'll help me, because many times the hadith and you just quote it in the talk, but you don't remember the reference. Where is it? What hadith number? So all of that now when you put in book, he did all of that. And 1 week before Ramadan, the publishers dropped the first consignment of books. I took it from the publisher and I gave it to my son who was leaving that day for Taraweeh to Ireland. He took the first batch and went. A couple of days later, I left for Umrah and came to the UK. So I came with the second batch. And alhamdulillah, it's been very well received.
MashaAllah. So is that your first book?
Yes.
And inshallah, you have planned to have more?
I don't know if I've got plans. There's been many requests. Let's see how it goes, inshallah. We still got some copies of this book that are there, and once it's out, I think there needs to be a bit of a breather sometimes. If the second book follows the first one too quickly, then it may not be ideal. But then we'll see, inshallah, whatever Allah Ta'ala wills. If it's of benefit, then we will try and do it.
Definitely. May Allah accept, mashallah, your hard efforts. Before we finish, inshallah, just last 2-3 advice to the young Muslim community of UK you can give through our podcast.
You started off by saying that you learn from South Africa. And that may be true historically, but I think these days there's a lot that we in South Africa can learn from you. I think halat and circumstances have forced you to fast track your process and your progress. And mashallah, great work is being done here. All I will say is that let us all continue to work on our ikhlas and sincerity, inshallah.
Inshallah.
And let us do our bit. You know, the great thing about haqq in comparison to batil is that batil requires quantity. Haqq requires quality.
Subhanallah.
Sometimes we may look at the environment we live in, we say, "Hey, there's so many evils, there's so much of immorality, there's so much of vice. Where do we stand a chance?" But it's like you walk into a dark room. You're totally engulfed and enveloped with darkness.
Subhanallah.
And then you just switch on a light. And it's like the darkness was never there. So haqq is like that. Wallahu yutimmu nurihi. Allah is the one who will ensure that the lightness will prevail, no matter what is happening or who intends otherwise. So try and be with the caravan of haqq. Here and there you falter, you lose your way, come back onto the sirat al-mustaqim. Do your work with ikhlas and do your work with istiqamat. That is what Allah has made us mukallaf of.
Definitely.
Right? Then the results are in the hands of Allah. There are Anbiya who preached for centuries and only a handful of people followed them. There are Anbiya who had only one follower and the Anbiya who had no followers. The results are not in our hands.
True.
But if we stick to the straight path and if we do whatever we do, always working on our ikhlas and doing it with istiqamat, then inshallah we will see success and results. Inshallah in this world as well as in the akhirah, but if not in this world, then definitely in the akhirah.
Jazakumullah to Hazrat Moulana for giving it your time and for enlightening with such words of wisdom. Allah accept you. Allah accept your coming. Allah accept all of us, inshallah. If anybody has any comments, inshallah, we'll try to share the book of Shaykh as well. Everybody try to get a copy and try to follow the Shaykh on Radio Islam. Until we meet again, Jazakumullah khairah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.